Hello everybody, welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today we're going to be doing a power ranking for Europe, Rainbow Six Siege, stage number 2, 2024. Okay, so on the screen I have what I would say was the general consensus or thereabouts for the preseason power rankings. A lot of these are sort of interchangeable. I think everybody's going to agree that BDS was number 1, and then Secret, Into the Breach, and Veritas Pro, I put them sort of in the same tier. Veritas Pro, you might argue, should be a little bit lower, depending on your assessment. For a variety of reasons, I put them here slightly above G2 and Wolves, who I have sort of as tier 3, and keep in mind this is before we saw them play in stage number 2. G2 and Wolves, G2 was at Manchester. They did really poorly. They made roster changes that a lot of people criticized, and then they didn't qualify for Esports World Cup. On the other hand, Wolves, they were not in Manchester. They made some roster changes, and then they did qualify for Esports World Cup, and then they did poorly at that event. So had either of these teams done better at their events and or made fewer roster changes or something, you know, maybe they would have been a little bit higher, but there were just enough question marks where I put them slightly lower. But as you'll see, things do certainly shift. And then sort of in the bottom tier, which I think probably there's more of a gap between this tier than these two tiers. These were fairly close. BDS was clearly number 1 and then wide gap, but it seems to me that there was also these guys and then a gap to these guys. I thought ENCE would be better than Fnatic and Wild. That could still prove to be true. It's we'll talk about it in a minute, but it's clearly not true at this exact moment in time. They've looked pretty awful. Fnatic, they made some puzzling roster changes. The Sarks pickup in particular is very controversial. And then Wild just looked like a bunch of random no-name players for the most part thrown together, and they've actually impressed. So before we talk about the teams anymore, let's do it in the power ranking format. And before I get into this, let me show you this really quickly. These are pulled from Liquipedia. They actually have a dark theme toggle on Liquipedia now. So I've used an extension to make it dark mode for a long time, but you can just go, it's in like the top right corner, just toggle on dark theme if you would prefer to have dark theme, which I assume most people would. Anyways, these are the standings as they are right now, and do keep in mind that 3 of these teams have had bye days, so Wild, Secret, and Veritas Pro have only played 2 best of ones, whereas the rest of the teams have played 3 best of ones. But again, we are talking about best of ones. They're not the most meaningful things ever, so I'm going to draw what conclusions I think we can from these, as well as take points from what we saw from these teams in Esports World Cup and or the qualifiers, even though we didn't actually get to see a lot of the qualifiers, though we do know the results, and then Manchester and maybe even stage 1. So yeah, those are the standings. And then here are the games that we've seen, only 12 of them. We've seen a few overtimes, BDS versus Wild, Veritas Pro versus Secret, and Wolves versus Fnatic. So we've actually seen 6 of the 9 teams go to overtime, and no team has gone to overtime twice. And we've seen a few stomps. G2 stomped Fnatic as well as ENCE, and then Wild with the most decisive game of the stage so far, 7-1ing ENCE. So yeah, bad luck for ENCE, or just, they played badly, whatever. But no 7-0s thus far. Anyways, let's get into the actual power rankings now. So starting at the bottom, pretty clearly ENCE deserve to be down here. ENCE are 7-21 on round count, which is terrible. They've lost 3 times as many rounds as they've won, which, that's just abysmal. They've had one close-ish game against Secret, and then they got crushed by G2 and they got crushed by Wild. So not much else you can say. Pretty clearly they deserve to be at the bottom here. Next up, we have Fnatic, and these bottom 2 teams do actually mirror the standings. These are the number 9 and the number 8 teams respectively. That trend is going to break as soon as we get to the next team. So anyways, yeah, Fnatic, they've not looked great. They did have one sort of glimmer. They were up 6-2 against Wolves, and then they lost 6 rounds in a row. So impressive for Wolves to have the resolve to win that many rounds in a row, and terrible for Fnatic to lose 6 rounds in a row when if you'd won when you were 6-2, 6-3, 6-4, 6-5, you would have won and got the full 3 points. Yeah, they certainly let that one slip. It was on the new map, so take that for what you will. Layer, I guess, was very defender-sided, and just some strange things can certainly happen on new maps. But Fnatic doesn't look good. I guess they look slightly better than ENCE. Fnatic is 11-22 on round count, so they at least have a 0.5 win-loss on rounds, whereas ENCE has that 0.33. Moving out of the clear bottom tier, next up I put Wild, and you might think this is a strange placement based on how good they've looked thus far, but they've only played the 2 games. Impressive of them to, well, they beat ENCE, who were looking like the worst team, but at least they destroyed them. That was the most decisive loss ENCE have taken thus far. and they almost beat BDS, the clear #1 team in the world coming into stage #2, not just in Europe, but in the entire world. So good on them to take them all the way. BDS, they dropped a point. They could have easily lost that game. So impressive stuff from Wild, but I don't think 2 best of 1s is enough to leap them way up the power rankings. If they keep this performance up, they'll quickly climb, but for now I'm going to leave them in 7th place. Number 6, we have Secret, and I think this might be the most controversial positioning that I do thus far. The next several are really, really hard. So let me sort of make my case here. Secret, they did beat ENCE, but it was the closest game for ENCE thus far. So 4 rounds was won by ENCE against Secret. Only 3 rounds were won by ENCE against G2 and Wild combined. So that's going in Secret. Secret lost to Veritas Pro. So, maybe you think Veritas Pro is a good team, but that's still a loss that they took. And those are actually the only 2 games that Secret have played thus far. The only 2 games we've seen from them. So it's really hard to place them. Had they made Esports World Cup, I think I probably would have put them higher. They were clearly the 2nd best European team in Manchester. They made top 8. They lost to BDS. That was the only loss they took in the event, and it eliminated them. But then, they failed to qualify for EWC, and the results aren't super impressive in their 2 best of 1s thus far. So if they bounce back in next week, which I think was actually a super week, the 16th, 17th, and 18th are all play days for Europe. So if they do well in those 3 play days, they could easily climb up to top 3 again or something. So we'll have to see. But for now, I'm going to put them at number 6, sort of a tentative placement. Next up, we have Veritas Pro, and I think this is maybe the one that you could really argue should be switched with Secret, but Veritas Pro, they beat them in the head-to-head. I think that might be the deciding factor for me. Veritas Pro beat Secret 8-6, and Veritas Pro, they lost to Wolves 7-3, so they took kind of a bad loss. Wolves, you're going to see are pretty high up, so losing to one of the top teams is not as bad. Veritas Pro, I still believe that they probably would have made it to Esports World Cup had they not played BDS so early on in the qualifiers. They got eliminated by BDS, who qualified and then won the entire event decisively. So that's just a tough draw to get. They even ran it extremely close against them. So I'm going to put Veritas Pro here for those reasons, but again, we could quickly see them fall or quickly see them rise potentially, depending on how the next week of games go. Then we have Into the Breach, and these guys aren't doing super well on the scoreboard. They're at number 6, but one of the teams they're above is Veritas Pro, who, as I mentioned previously, has played 1 fewer game than them, and 2 of the teams directly above them have also played 1 fewer game, so even better for them, Wild and Secret, to be above Into the Breach in that way. But they are the only team, along with BDS from Europe, to make it to both Manchester and Esports World Cup, even though they weren't super impressive at either. I think you'd say that they looked a little bit better at Esports World Cup, which you generally prefer. It was the more recent event, so better to have a trend of improvement rather than the opposite. Just looking at their games they've had this stage, they lost to Wolves, but it was a 7-5. They lost to BDS in the most recent play day, also 7-5. So a couple of close ones against 2 of the teams that are clearly going to be above them based on the teams we have and haven't seen so far. And their 1 win was against Fanatic, 7-3. So, you're beating a team fairly decisively that you want to be beating decisively. You beat one of the bottom teams. So another team that could quickly go up and down. And, that really is true for all the teams. We've only seen 1/3 of the play days. A lot can change in the following 6 play days. So I'm going to put them here. A lot to do with the scores that their games have ended in, and also to do with the fact that they were they at least qualified for the last 2 international events. Number 3, G2, and I think there's a bit of an argument to make G2 versus Wolves here. Wolves are number 1 on the standings. They're even above BDS. They're tied with them on points, but they have a better round differential. G2 7-2'd Fnatic, and they 7-2'd ENCE. So they have really impressive round differential. They're at +7, which is actually higher than BDS, and BDS is 3-0, whereas G2 is 2-1. So really decisive results for them there. And then the one loss that they've taken was against BDS. So again, seemingly the best team in the world, and you destroyed the 2 worst teams in your league, which you should be doing. So I put G2 here. I just think Wolves' results have been a little bit more impressive. And also, one thing, if you think it's much closer than I'm making it sound, one last thing, Wolves made it to Esports World Cup. G2 did not. Wolves was the team that eliminated G2 in the qualifier. So if you want to go off head-to-head, they haven't played in a best of 1 so far this stage, but in a best of 3 to make it to Esports World Cup or not, Wolves did eliminate G2, so they have that going for them. Even if, again, Wolves looked pretty bad at Esports World Cup, they did eliminate G2, and they've looked pretty good this stage thus far. So yeah, next up, clearly Wolves. I've been talking about them. They are top of the board. That could quickly change. They 7-5 defeated ITV. They 7-3 beat Veritas Pro, so a close one against ITV and then a solid one against Veritas Pro. Looked like that was going to be a really close game. It went 3-3 at the half, but then Wolves ran away with it once they got onto the attack of Clubhouse, winning 4 in a row, winning all of their attacks until the match ended. And then finally, Wolves, they won 8-6 versus Fanatic, so it was really close, but they showed impressive resolve. As I mentioned previously, they were down 6-2. They won 6 rounds in a row, so good on them there. They showed that with their backs against the wall, they can still make it happen. Maybe it was one of the easier teams to make a comeback against, but they'd already lost 6 rounds against Fnatic. They could have lost one more very easily, but that did not happen. So that's Wolves, and then who's going to be number 1? BDS. If we were just going off what we've seen this stage in the best of ones, maybe they'd be slightly lower. But if we go off of what we've seen before the stage, they won Esports World Cup dominantly. They were the second place team in Manchester pretty clearly. I still have to put them at number 1 on power rankings. So yeah, I think that's going to be my power rankings for the moment. This could certainly change throughout the stage. Let me know what you would change. I think BDS still deserve to be number 1. ENCE pretty clearly last place. Fnatic pretty clear in 8th. Again, depending on what you value, you can move Wild up a little bit. Secret, Veritas Pro, they could potentially be switched. Wolves and G2 could be switched. Into the Breach could be a little bit lower. So a variety of things could be changed, but if you had any team like more than 2 positions away from where I had them, I think it would be pretty surprising. So anyways, yeah, that's going to do it for me. I will catch you guys next time.